Alright, let's kill it with section 1 of Unit 5. We are looking at sectionalism, Civil War, and Reconstruction. Let's start with the North versus the South. Our first question, what tensions did westward expansion create? It revealed economic, social, political tensions between the North and the South. And the biggest question here was slavery. Should we have it? Should we not have it? What should we do with these new lands out west? Two major issues. We are looking at states' rights. Who should be allowed to decide if we have slavery in the new territories? Should it be the states? Should it be the federal government? And then the other one is going to be expansion of slavery in the new lands. So states' rights, slavery. Sectionalism. If you tuned in for Unit 4, we are going with sectionalism. It's just like nationalism, but it's pride in your section of the country. So you are just prideful, really super pumped about what section you live in. Name and explain 3 factors that made the North unique, and then we're going to tackle the South. That's what you're looking at here. You can pick any of those, put them in your own words. You gotta have 3 of them. Moving and grooving. Section 2, growth and industry in the North. What 3 areas saw improvements in terms of transportation in the mid-1800s? Roads, canals, steamboats, railroads. Pick any of them. How did population trends and settlement change? Well, once we were able to move easily, we had better transportation, then we were able to move to the north. We're able to move out west. We're able to go where we want to go. But the draw of the north was that industrialization, was the workplace, being able to find a job up in the urban centers. What was a positive and a negative of northern industrial growth? Positive, people are making money. And negatives, you got a whole bunch of them. Pollution, disease, living in those close quarters, gap between the rich and the poor. The list goes on and on and on. But the biggest one that is the positive is that we're making money, all of that wealth. What was the cotton gin? Cotton gin is that invention that was made to make it easier to separate the cotton and the seeds. It makes it more productive. And the next question is the impact. How did this invention lead to an increase in the demand of slavery? So how did the cotton gin impact slavery? Easy. Now that we can increase our cotton production, you're going to see the plantations growing, which increases the need for slaves on the plantation. Just because there's a machine that they can now use doesn't mean the machine runs on its own. You got to have somebody operating the machine. So it increases the need for slavery because we reduce the time it takes to get the cotton ready to sell, which also reduces the cost, which means that more people are buying. I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop. What was women's suffrage? Women's suffrage is the movement for the right to vote. What happened at the Seneca Falls Convention? We are going to have women coming together to start this campaign for the right to vote there. And then the Declaration of Sentiments, that's that document that's modeled after the Declaration of Independence that's going to demand equality for women. All right, Section 3, Civil War. What did the series of compromises try to do? All of these compromises that we make, the Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, Kansas-Nebraska Act, all of them try to put off the inevitable, which is the Civil War. We try to keep that balance or maintain equal numbers between the free and the slave states, but it doesn't work. It just tumbles us right straight into the Civil War no matter what we do. You want to compromise, explain the goal of the compromise. Let's just write these down here. We got a little bit more room. So if we got the Missouri Compromise, which gave us the 36-30 line, and that told us that the North was free, South was slave, and then you got the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 is going to try to fix the problems with the Missouri Compromise out in the West. Again, the goal is going to be to maintain those numbers. That's where we get the Fugitive Slave Act. And then remember, California comes in as a free state. And then you've got the Kansas, Nebraska Act. And the big one there is popular sovereignty, which meant that the people were going to decide if they were going to be free or slave. You pick any of those three, and or any two out of those three, and you got them. Name and explain 3 examples of how the compromises failed to stop the growing tension between the two. Alrighty, you have Bleeding Kansas, which is going to be connected to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It's not going to work when we tell people that they can vote. The Dred Scott decision, which was the court case that essentially said blacks are not citizens, they're not even people, they don't have rights, and that enforces the idea of slavery. You got John Brown's Raid, which was you remember he was the crazy white abolitionist that said, we're going to let the slaves revolt, here's a gun, and that didn't work. Remember, he was the martyr for the cause of the North. And then, of course, we have the nullification and the tariff crisis. When the government tries to put a high tariff on goods, the South gets extremely angry because they are importing all of their equipment in, and that makes it more expensive for them. The southern states say that they can just nullify, remember that root word there, nullify, or get rid of the tax, which they say they do, which really was just a fancy way of saying we're not going to pay it because we don't want to. And that was kind of those were all of the steps leading up to that increase in tension moving towards the Civil War. The election of Lincoln marks the beginning of the North gaining control in the government. Remember, Lincoln is going to be the party of the Union, the Republican Party, and what he really believes is that the federal government should be in power. But remember, in the beginning, his goal was to preserve the Union. He didn't want to initially get rid of slavery. It won't be a little bit down the line until he decides that. But the South reacts to Lincoln's election as an attack on their way of life. They say, this is it. The North is coming after us. We've got to end this. We've got to go down that black hole into the war. How did Lincoln feel about the Southern secession or the breaking apart? He says you can't do it. It's not in the Constitution, so they can't legally break away from the Union. So the entire time that he is involved in the Civil War, he says the South really isn't, they never really left. Constitutional issue, that's going to be states' rights. States' rights versus the federal government. Who has the power to decide what can go on within the states? In the North, that's going to be the federal government, and in the South, that's going to be the state government. Habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. I'm going to plug the blog here. Go back and read the post on habeas corpus. It's a real good read. And here, habeas corpus is your right to be presented in a court, your right to a fair trial, your right to be jailed only with a just cause. So what just cause means is reason. It just means that the court has to have a reason to keep you in jail. What did Lincoln do to habeas corpus during the war? He suspended it. Why? He thought that our energy should be targeted towards the war, not towards dealing with the court system at the time. He did it for safety. Advantages did the North have? How did this impact? The North has all the technology. Simply put, they've got money and weapons. They've got the industrialization. They're connected through the rail lines, which means they have the materials, they have the money to make more materials, and they have the money to move those materials wherever they needed to go. We're flying. End of the Civil War, politics of Reconstruction. Section 4. 2 issues was the Civil War fought over. Fought over slavery and who has more authority, federal government or the state government. Advantages did the North have that allowed them to win? Easy enough. Superior weapons, transportation, greater wealth. What did the North's win prove? It proves that the federal government has supreme and would enforce the law. They would enforce that power. What issue or question did the war leave to be answered? What do we do with the Southern Confederacy? They just tried to break off from us. They just tried to leave. You can't just forget about that. What do we do? Do they come back? No consequences? What do the consequences look like? And that is what Reconstruction is going to do. To reconstruct something means to put it back together. What are we putting back together? We're putting back together the United States. How long does Reconstruction last? I don't even have to go back and look. It lasts until 1877. If you want a direct time period, 65 to 77, 12 years. Why didn't Lincoln's conservative plan go into effect? I hate to be so crass here, but he dies. He gets assassinated. He never gets to see his plan go through. Let's just review really quickly. His plan was conservative because he wanted to reunify as quickly as possible. He says, you Southern Democrats, you got to make a vote, or you've got to make an oath of loyalty. Once you do that, and 10% of your population has done that, you can come back to the Union. No questions asked. Very conservative. What did the radicals try to do to Johnson's plan? They try to shut it down. They try to make sure that his plan does not go through. They think it's too weak because he attempted to model the plan after Lincoln's plan. So they even go so far to say, well, we should try to impeach you. We don't want to hear your plan. We want it to be much harsher than what you are trying to make it be. And if you won't listen to us, well, then it's time for you to get out of office. What did the radical Republicans require the South to do under their Reconstruction, and how was it enforced? They are going to say that the states can't be admitted until they accept the 14th Amendment and they allow all black men the right to vote. And the way that they are going to do that is by placing the South under military control. So they're going to say these are what we want to see down there. We want to see African Americans in new jobs in the government. We want to see them voting. We want to see them being treated just like every other citizen. And we're going to have the military down there to make sure you do it. When Reconstruction ended in 1877, what did it mark? So it marks the reunification of the United States, coming back together as the one United States. All right, Section 5, impacts on African Americans. Purpose of the Freedmen's Bureau: to educate the newly freed population. What were 3 amendments passed? You've got the 13th, 14th, 15th, and slavery. This is going to be equal protection. Ooh dear, I don't know what it's doing there. Ooh boy. Protection under the law for citizens, and it gives a definition for that. And then the 15th is voting rights. Who was still excluded from voting under the 15th Amendment? That's going to be women. What did Du Bois believe should be done to support the newly freed? He is going to say that the best way to serve the community was by investing in traditional forms of education. So educate yourself, and that would be the best, smartest thing that you could do. Washington is going to be a little bit different. Booker T. Washington is going to say that vocational trades should be used. So he's going to say we've been in these jobs, we should stay in these jobs, and we shouldn't really push out of this system. Vocational trades are things that you can do with your hands. So the difference between these two forms of education is you can see Du Bois was a Harvard doctorate student. He's going to say education, put your nose in a book, learn everything you can, and that's going to be what best serves the community. Where Washington is going to say you should stay in the traditional forms of jobs, farming, becoming a blacksmith, things that can help out the community in a different way. When did Reconstruction end? Reconstruction ends with the election of Hayes. Because the Republicans agree to remove the military from the South, they get the presidential pick of Hayes. What did the North agree to do at the end? That I already told you. They removed the military from the South. Section 6, the end of Reconstruction and what setbacks we see for African Americans. Impact of Hayes' election on the South. If we look here, the economy of the South began, never mind. That's not what we want. The military presence of the South is removed. It's what I said before. What was the Solid South? The Solid South is going to be this time of the white Democrats dominating in politics. So really, the 12 years that we saw in Reconstruction, where we wanted to have the advancements of African Americans and their rights and things like that, it kind of immediately goes away, and that's represented in the Solid South. The KKK and what they accomplished. This is going to be a vigilante terrorist group to intimidate blacks from being able to go out and use these rights that they were just given with violence and fear. Jim Crow, Black Codes. These are going to be state laws that denied blacks their basic civil rights that they were just given. Denying the 15th Amendment. That's going to be your poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather The poll tax meant you had to pay to vote. This one is the read to vote. And this one is if your grandfather voted, you could vote. What did Plessy versus Ferguson say was legal? Plessy versus Ferguson, that phrase that we want to remember is separate but equal. They say that you can segregate, that's okay, as long as these two separate facilities are equal. Now, did they define what equal was? No, and that's where the problem comes from. And I just answered that question for you. Equal? No, never equal, and nobody was monitoring that, so that's how we know they aren't equal. Where did industrialization take place? Who benefited the most from it? Industrialization is going to take place in the north, and that's where it's going to dominate. And in the north, the people who benefit the most from it are going to be those big business owners. How was supply and demand impacted? How has supply and demand impacted the southern economy? This is going to, the South benefited from the high need for cotton, but you don't always have that high need. And even after the Civil War, we saw that it's not that there wasn't a need for cotton, but the South had no supply, so we had to figure out how to meet that demand in other places because the South had been absolutely decimated after the Civil War, so it's pretty hard to just get right back up and start farming again. And sharecropping. Sharecropping is going to be that replacement for slavery. It's a way to keep the newly freed slaves on the plantation by creating this system of, okay, you don't have land of your own, well, I'll rent this to you. The white landowners say, you pay me this rent, I'll take a portion of the crop yield, and I'll even rent out the supplies and anything that you need here. But it's all, as soon as they made some money on the crops, they'd have to pay all of this rent, and there wasn't enough money left over to go and buy their own land, so it's keeping the newly freed slaves right on the plantation. All right, sorry that was a little bit longer, but that's the end of Unit 5, and hopefully I'll be doing Unit 6 with you in school. Again, let me know of any questions, email me.